Bob Von Borgen, President Emeritus of the Armed Forces Heritage Museum and your host for this series. In this episode, Colonel Holm will relate a military activity that brings home the destructiveness and maliciousness of war. It is a stirring tale of a heroic rescue and his reaction in the aftermath of that bold operation. Let's join him now as he relates the combat side of his role as an air advisor to the Afghanistan Air Force.
What I've been talking about has all been kind of warm and fuzzy, if you will. We've helped children. I've showed you beautiful scenery, but remember, this is a war zone. When Patrick went back to the orphanage in May, it was May 18th, I was stuck again doing flying missions in Gardez, and when I was returning from Gardez in southeast Afghanistan, I was approaching Kabul, and it shows a picture of this of the orphanage again with Patrick. And he went back from that mission, and I was just returning from Gardez when I noticed a burning vehicle as I was approaching southern Kabul. And I looked to my left, and my flight engineer, an Afghan, I was the only American on board this helicopter. Usually we try to have one American in each helicopter. We always flew in a formation of two, or two Americans in one helicopter. In this case, I was the only American, and there was another American in the other helicopter. I looked over and I saw a burning vehicle on the southern edge of Kabul, and my flight engineer, an Afghan, said, "Oh, very bad, very bad." And I went into an orbit, and I tried to call my wingman and say, "Look, I see something, I'm checking it out." And then I saw Americans on the ground, and then I saw multiple vehicles, and I saw an American vehicle, a Suburban, split in half. And I tried to call my wingman back, but I couldn't get a hold of him. And I saw American wounded on the ground. And so I'm the only American on board this helicopter. I see a landing place, and I tell my Afghan friends, we're going in. I had no radio contact. I just saw Americans, and we got to go help. So I landed my helicopter, and the next picture shows a burning smoke and a bus and a wall that's been blown apart. This wall is like this thick and about 10 feet high, made of stone, and it was just blown apart. What we had come across was a suicide attacker had taken the opportunity to blow up a U.S. convoy. And as he was driving by the convoy, he detonated himself and blew this hole in this wall. I landed my helicopter at a location that was relatively close so we could go in there and help, but not so close because the tactic of the terrorists in this area is to attack the rescue forces, the initial attack and then the rescue forces. What we didn't know that this was an attack of opportunity. It wasn't very well planned, but I was concerned about it. So I landed my helicopter about 40 yards or so from the blast, and I looked at my Afghan friends, my flight engineer and my interpreter, that I have no authority over. You got to understand. And I said, "Gentlemen, please look to go help my friends." And then I got out of the helicopter, ran through, literally went through the breach on my order, literally through the breach of hell, if you will, and went in through that wall around the crater. And let me tell you something, it was very, very scary. And it was right after the explosion, and the Americans were confused and had their guns up, and here are two Afghans approaching them. And my Afghan friends came right back to the helicopter and said, they did not want to talk to us, sir. My co-pilot at the time was that same young man that I was still teaching how to fly in the right seat. And I looked at him, and I said to him, like I tell my lab, Jenny, I said, in very good English, "Stay." I was a little nervous, and I just wanted him to stay. So I unbuckled from the helicopter, and I got out, and I ran through that wall. And you can see the burning bus. It was my Normandy moment, if you will. Bodies everywhere, body parts, burning bodies, burning whatever, and it was horrific. The suicide bomber had killed some 35, 40 Afghans in that bus, and several vehicles. And then I come up to the Americans. I see they're still in disarray, and I'm a colonel, and I'm a former Army guy, so set up a perimeter. Where is your wounded? And they take me to a young man that was sitting next to a car, and I remember, I don't know how graphic it gets, but I mean, it was part of the story. I knelt down to the young man. He had blood coming out of his eyes, his nose, and his ears, and he was shaking, and there was a young French soldier had her in his arms, and he was really close to being unconscious. And I said, "Can you stand up?" And I noticed when I was waiting for him, there was a foot sitting right next to him. That was the most closest thing. Up until that point, I'd seen things, but I just totally tried to block it out. And I said, "Can you walk?" And I just threw him over my shoulders, and the French soldier helped me, and we dragged him through that wall back into my helicopter and put him down. And I'd seen more Americans, so I ran back in there, and I found a colonel and a sergeant major, and they were both kind of covered in blood. And then I saw another American on the ground, and I ran to him, and I went down to try to help him, and they said he was dead. And I stood up and kind of looking at this man and feeling terrible. And the sergeant major walked up to the colonel, who was both of them covered in blood, and he handed him a handful of bloody dog tags and said, "Here's your dog tags." He didn't say it in such a nice way. It was at that point that I knew I was low on fuel, and I looked at the colonel and the sergeant major, and even though I was a lieutenant colonel, I said, "Gentlemen, you're coming with me." And I grabbed him and I threw him back in the helicopter and drew him back, and then I ran back one more time because I was looking for Afghans. And all the Afghans were either dead or they'd already been taken by Afghans to hospitals and vehicles. And I ran back to the helicopter, and I noticed we were very low on fuel. I strapped in and took off. And by the time I got to Kabul, declared an emergency, all my fuel lights were flashing, and it was a bit stressful. And I felt terrible because I couldn't take the bodies. I felt terrible about what I'd seen. Landed the helicopter, and we were at a French hospital in Kabul. Got to be honest with you, it was a very difficult situation. I mean, I was so low on fuel, I was nervous to ground taxi back to my parking spot. But when I did park, and it was all over, I broke down. You just don't know how you're going to react when you see it. And then when the pressure of the moment is relieved, I started weeping. And my group commander came and grabbed me and put me, kind of protected me so I wouldn't be too ashamed. And I went back to my room and took a shower because I was kind of covered in blood. And I got back to the ops room, and I found out that there was an airplane missing up in the Hindu Kush, those big mountains. And it was an airline, Premier Airlines was missing. And the Afghans called me and said, "Hey, we want Colonel Olaf to go fly because we know he can fly in the mountains, and to go look for this airplane." And my commander looked at me, "Are you up for it?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to get in the saddle. I want to forget about this day." And so I was cleaned up, got in the helicopter, and we took off, went to Bagram to find where this airplane was last seen, loaded up with lunch, and then started climbing up over the Hindu Kush mountains. And at this point, there were like 13,000 feet right there. And as we're climbing, we're not a pressurized helicopter. And as we're climbing up, all of a sudden in the cockpit, boom, big huge boom. After what I'd just been through. Well, we picked up lunch, and in lunch they were nice enough to give us a couple bags of potato chips. As we got up in altitude, the bags exploded. It was pretty funny. So I had potato chip dust and kind of laughed about it and went back to the business looking for this airplane. I searched for about 3 hours looking at altitudes approaching. I don't want to record because I'll get in trouble. And we never found it. They actually found it the next day, and that's another story of importance because the Afghans, when they realized that they could go up to altitude, because I showed it to them on paper, and then I showed it to them by flying, and they gained huge notoriety because it was an Afghan helicopter helping Afghan people. They didn't know there was an American pilot up that Salang Pass. Now here it is. We can do this. The Afghans launched helicopters to go up to 11,000, 12,000 feet to recover those bodies. Remember how important that is in the Islamic culture. And they recovered the bodies of those lost souls and did it all on their own. Not a single American helped out with that mission. So I was very, very proud of that because it showed that the Afghan government could support their own people. And that meant a lot to the stability of the country. So that day ended up, I was exhausted. Seeing the things I saw, flying and the potato chip explosion, the soldiers, the death, the violence. But people knew how to take care of me when I got home. And they knew if I was upset and I got back to my room, good old cold can of A&W root beer went a long ways. They had A&W root beer and my favorite movie, The Hangover, and so that got me through it. So I don't have PTSD. Was able to adjust, but I had to get right back to work.
The explosion of that potato chip bag probably did much to reset Colonel Holm's demeanor after his combat experience at the wall. You will note that he is pleased to report that he does not struggle with post-traumatic stress, or PTS, as so many of his fellow combat veterans endure today. The nation has only recently fully begun to understand PTS. It's a serious problem. It has impacted combat veterans in every military engagement in the nation's history. The Armed Forces Heritage Museum is working on a documentary on PTS. It should be released later this year. In our next episode in this series, we'll delve deeper into the humanitarian aspects of his role as an air advisor. Tune in to hear more about it. And also, would you please consider making a contribution in funding for these veteran interviews? It's pretty easy. Just go to www.afhmus.org and follow the instructions. Donations in any amount are appreciated. And while it's fresh in your mind, why not do it now? Thanks.